sensitive information, so sure.
So Secretary Clinton's revised statement that she never knowingly sent or received any classified information is probably also untrue.
Yeah, I don't want to comment on people's public statements. We did not find evidence sufficient to establish that she knew she was sending classified information beyond a reasonable doubt to meet that the intent standard. But like I said, I understand why people are confused by the whole discussion. I get that. But you know what would be a double standard? If she were prosecuted for gross negligence.
But your statement on Tuesday said there is evidence to support a conclusion that any reasonable person in Secretary Clinton's position should have known that an unclassified system was no place for that conversation.
I stand by that.
And that's very clear.
That's the definition of carelessness, of negligence.
Which happened
Oh, yeah.
as a result of our Secretary of State's, former Secretary of State's decisions.
Yes.
Is it your statement then before this committee that Secretary Clinton should have known not to send classified material, and yet she did?
Well, certainly she should have known not to send classified information. As I said, that's the definition of negligent. I think she was extremely careless. I think she was negligent. That I could establish. What we can't establish is that she acted with the necessary criminal intent.
Do you believe that that since the Department of Justice hasn't used the statute Congress passed, it's invalid?
No, I think they're worried that it's invalid, that it will be challenged on constitutional grounds, which is why they've used it extraordinarily sparingly in the decades.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. We'll now go to, I'll recognize Mr. Liu of California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I read some of my Republican colleagues' press statements, and as I sit here today, I am reminded of that quote from Macbeth, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. I've heard some sound and fury today from members of the committee, and the reason they largely signify nothing is because of two fundamental truths that are self-evident. The first of which, none of the members of this committee can be objective on this issue. I can't be objective. I've endorsed Hillary Clinton for president, as have the Democratic members of this committee. My Republican colleagues can't be objective. They oppose Hillary Clinton for president, which is why we have you. You are a nonpartisan career public servant that has served our nation with distinction and honor. And not only can you be objective, it is your job to be objective, to apply the law fairly and equally, regardless of politics. I think it'd be important for the American people to get a fuller appreciation of your public service. So let me ask you, before you were FBI director, how many years did you serve as a federal prosecutor?
I think 15.
For a period of time, you were at Columbia Law School as a scholar, and you specialized in national security law. Is that correct?
Sometimes I fantasize I still am.
All right. Thank you. When you served in the Republican administration of President George W. Bush, you were then the second highest ranking member of the Department of Justice. Is that right?
Yes, President Bush appointed me to be U.S. Attorney in Manhattan and then the number 2 in the Department of Justice. When you were confirmed for the FBI director position, the vote was 93-1. Is that correct? That's correct. With that strong bipartisan support, it's not surprising that Senator Grassley, Republican, said during your confirmation, and I quote, "Director Comey has a reputation for applying the law fairly and equally regardless of politics." In this case, did you apply the law fairly and equally regardless of politics? Yes. Did you get any political interference from the White House? None. Did you get any political interference from the Hillary Clinton campaign? None. One of the reasons you're appointed to a fixed term of 10 years, a very long term, is to help insulate you from politics. Isn't that right? That's correct. The second fundamental truth today about this hearing is that none of the members of this committee have any idea what we're talking about, because we have not reviewed the evidence personally in this case. When I served on active duty in the U.S. Air Force in the 1990s, one of my duties was a prosecutor. One of the first things I learned as a prosecutor is it is unprofessional and wrong to make allegations based on evidence that one has not reviewed. So let me ask you, has any member of this committee, to the best of your knowledge, reviewed the 30,000 emails at issue in this case? I don't know, not to my knowledge. Has any member of this committee sat through the multiple witness interviews that the FBI conducted in this case? No, that I know, no. Has any member of this committee received any special information about the files that you kept or other FBI agents kept on this case? Not to my knowledge. Now let's do a little bit of math here. 1% of 30,000 emails would be 300 emails, is that right? I think that's right.
Right. 30 emails would be 1/10 of 1%, and 3 emails would be 1/100th of 1% of 30,000, right?
I think that's right.
Okay. So of those 3 emails, 1/100th of 1% of 30,000, they bore these tiny little classified markings, which is, as you described, a C with parentheses, correct?
Correct.
Okay. It is certainly possible that a busy person who has sent and received over 30,000 emails just might miss this marking of a C with parentheses. It is possible, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So let me now just conclude by stating what some of my colleagues have, which is there's just the strongest whiff of hypocrisy going on here. The American public might be interested in knowing that all members of Congress receive security clearances just for being a member of Congress. We get to have private email servers. We get to have private email accounts. We can use multiple devices. We can take devices overseas. And really, at the end of the day, when the American people look at this hearing, they need to ask themselves this question: do they trust the biased, partisan politicians on this committee who are making statements based on evidence we have not reviewed, or do they trust the distinguished FBI director? I would trust the FBI director. I yield back.
Thank you. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Micah, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, how long did you investigate this matter?
Just about a year.
A year. And do you believe you conducted a legitimate investigation?
Yes, sir.
And it was a legitimate subject that was something that you should look into? You had that responsibility, is that correct?
Yes.
We have a responsibility to hear from you on the action that you took. This weekend and, well, tomorrow we'll go back to our districts and we have to explain to people, I'll be at a couple of cafes where I see folks and meetings, and they're going to ask a lot of questions about what took place. Have you seen the Broadway production Hamilton?
Not yet. I'm hoping to.
I haven't either, but I understand it won the choreography Tony Award. I think you and others know that. The problem I have in explaining to my constituents is what's come down. It almost looks like a choreography. Let me just go over it real quickly with you. Last Tuesday, not this week, 1 week ago, former President Clinton meets with the Attorney General in Phoenix. The next Friday, last Friday, Mrs. Lynch, the AG, says she's going to defer to the FBI on whatever you came up with. On Saturday morning, I saw the vans pull up. This is this past Saturday, and you questioned Secretary Clinton for 3 hours. Is that? I guess that's correct.
3.5 it went.
Okay. And then on Tuesday morning, the morning after July 4th, we watched in our office. I had my interns. I said, "Come in. We've got the FBI director. Let's hear what he has to say." We're all kind of startled. And you basically said you were going to recommend not to prosecute, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
And then Tuesday, well, we had President Obama and Secretary Clinton arrive in Charlotte at 2 o'clock, and shortly thereafter, we had the Attorney General was closing the case. This is rapid fire. I mean, now, my folks think that there's something fishy about this. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but there are a lot of questions on how this came down. I have questions about how this came down. Did you personally interview the secretary on Saturday morning?
I didn't personally, no.
And how many agents did?
I think we had 5 or 6 in the...
Did you talk to all of those agents after the interview?
I did not speak to all of them, no.
Did she testify or talk to them under oath?
No.
She did not. Well, that's a problem. But
No, it's still a crime to lie to us.
I know it is, do you have a transcript of that?
No, we don't record our,
Do you have a 302, I guess it's called analysis?
I do. I don't have it with me, but I do.
Did you read it?
Yes.
You did. Can we get a copy of it since the case is closed?
I don't know the answer.
I would like a copy of it provided to the committee. I would like also for the last 30 days, any communications between you or any agent or any person in the FBI with the Attorney General or those in authority in the Department of Justice on this matter. Could you provide us with that?
We'll provide you with whether we can under the law and under our policy. It'll actually be easy in my case.
Mm-hmm. You see the problem that I have, though, is I have to go back and report to people what took place.
Sure.
Now, did you write the statement that you gave on Tuesday?
Yes.
You did. And did you write, and you said you didn't talk to all of the agents, but all of the agents, did they meet with you? And then, is that the group that said that we all vote to not recommend prosecution?
Well, yeah, I did not meet with all of the agents. I've met with, well, I guess I've met with all of them.
We're getting the word that it was like unanimous out of FBI that we don't prosecute.
Or what's your question, Congressman?
Well, again, I want to know who counseled you. You read their summary. Okay, she was not under oath. And it appears, I mean, members have cited here where she lied or misled to Congress, which will lead now to the next step of our possibly giving you a referral on this matter. You're aware of that?
Yes, someone mentioned that earlier.
And that probably will happen. Thank you for shedding some light on what took place.
Can I, Mr. Chairman,
Sure, go ahead.
respond
Absolutely.
just very briefly? I hope what you'll tell the folks in the cafe is, look me in the eye and listen to what I'm about to say. I did not coordinate that with anyone. The White House, the Department of Justice, nobody outside the FBI family had any idea what I was about to say. I say that under oath. I stand by that. There was no coordination. There was an insinuation of what you were saying that I don't mean to get strong in responding, but I want to make sure I was definitive about that.
Thank you,
sir.
Thank you. We'll now recognize the gentlewoman from the Virgin Islands, Ms. Plaskett, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. Director Comey, I would rather be here talking with you about the FBI's investigation and their resources to those individuals who are acting under color of law, who have apparently committed egregious violations in the killings that we've seen in the recent days. But instead, Mr. Chairman, I'm sitting here and I've listened patiently as a number of individuals have gone on national TV and made accusations against Director Comey, both directly and indirectly, because he recommended against prosecution based upon the facts. I've listened just very recently here in this hearing as my esteemed colleague from Florida tries to insinuate the condensation of an investigation into 1 week that actually occurred over a much, much longer period of time. And using that condensation and conspiracy theory to say that there's some orchestration. And that they have accused Mr. Director Comey of basing his decision on political considerations rather than the facts. I've heard chuckles and laughter here in this hearing, and I don't think there's anything to be smiling or laughing about. Because I want to say something to those individuals who are chuckling and laughing and making attacks on Director Comey for doing his job. You have no idea who you're talking about. Your accusations are completely off base, utterly offensive to us as American people. I know this because I've had the honor of working for Director Comey during my own service at the Department of Justice. From 2002 to 2004, I served as senior counsel to the Deputy Attorney General. I worked with both the Deputy Attorney General, Larry Thompson, and Deputy Attorney General Jim Comey when he became deputy as a staff attorney. And I know from my own experiences that Director Comey is a man of impeccable integrity. There are very few times when you as an attorney or as an individual can work with individuals or a gentleman who is completely that, someone who is above the fray. Anyone who suggests or implies that he made his recommendations on anything but the facts simply does not know James Comey. We've used the term no reasonable prosecutor. Well, I know that James Comey doesn't act as what a reasonable prosecutor was due, because he is the unyielding prosecutor. He is the prosecutor who does what is politically not expedient for himself, his staff, but for the law. And I'm not the only person in this hearing, in this committee, who's worked with Director Comey or for him. Representative Gowdy himself also commended Director Comey, and he said this, and I quote, "I used to work with him. I think Comey is doing exactly what you want. He's doing a serious investigation behind closed doors, away from the media's attention, and I'm going to trust him until I see a reason not to." Representative Gowdy referred to Director Comey as honorable and apolitical. He said, "This is exactly what you want in law enforcement." Well, it's exactly what you want in law enforcement until the decision is not the decision that you want. Director Comey, Chairman Chaffetz, as it was said by one of my colleagues, went on television and accused you of making, quote, a political calculation. He said that your recommendation was nothing more than, quote, a political determination in the end. I'm going to ask you, how do you respond to that? Were your actions in any way, shape, or form governed by political consideration?
No, not in any way.
And did anyone with Secretary Clinton's campaign or the administration influence your recommendation for political reasons?
No, they didn't influence it in any way.
I'm going to take you at your word, because I know, and those who will go through the record of your long tenure as a career prosecutor, and they look at examples, will see that you have taken decisions that have not been that which your supervisors, which the president, which others have wanted you to take. As a fellow prosecutor who believed that the facts must come above politics, I'm thankful that we have you. And Director Comey, I want to thank you for your service to our country, and you have our support. We would like to see as much documents, and I'm grateful that you want to keep the transparency so that the American public can understand the difference between what they hear in the media and the elements of a crime necessary for criminal prosecution. Thank you.
Thank the gentlewoman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Director Comey. I want to talk a little bit about cybersecurity. The State Department's Inspector General report detailed instances of multiple attacks on Secretary Clinton's computer, as well as her replying to suspicious email from the personal account of the Undersecretary of State. Director, you said that hostile actors successfully gained access to the commercial email accounts of people Secretary Clinton regularly communicated with. In the case of the Romanian hacker Guccifer, according to accessing Sidney Blumenthal's account, and that's been public for some time. During your investigation, were there other people in the State Department or that regularly communicated with Secretary Clinton that you can confirm were successfully hacked?
Yes.
And were these folks that regularly communicated with the Secretary?
Yes.
And were you able to conclude definitively that the attempted hacks referenced in the IG report were not successful?
We were not able to conclude that they were successful. I think that's the best way to say it.
All right, so while you said that given the nature of Clinton's server, you would be unlikely to see evidence one way or the other of whether or not it had been successfully hacked, how many unsuccessful attempts did you uncover? Did you find any there?
There were unsuccessful attempts. I don't know the number off the top of my head.
Do you have an idea, were they from foreign governments? Where did they come from?
I want to be careful what I say in an open setting, and so we can give you that information, but I don't want to give any foreign government's knowledge of what I know. So they're
all right, but would you be so far as to say they probably weren't American high school students fooling around?
Correct. It was not limited to
all right.
Criminal activity.
During your investigation, did you or anyone in the FBI interview the hacker Guccifer?
Yes.
And he claimed he gained access to Sid Blumenthal's email account and traced him back to Clinton's private server. Can you confirm that Guccifer never gained access to her server?
Yeah, he did not. He admitted that was a lie.
All right, well, at least that's good to hear. All right, Section 793 of Title 18 of the United States Codes makes it a crime to allow classified information to be stolen through gross negligence. Were you to discover that hostile actors had actually gotten into Secretary Clinton's email, would that have changed your recommendation with respect to prosecuting her?
Unlikely, although we didn't consider that question because we didn't have those facts.
All right, I want to go back to the question of intent real quick for just a second. I'm a recovering attorney. It's been decades since I actually practiced law. But you kept referring to she had to know it was illegal to have the requisite criminal intent. I was always taught in law school, and I don't know where this changed, that ignorance of the law was no excuse. If I'm driving along at 45 miles an hour and didn't see the 35-mile-an-hour speed limit, I was still intentionally speeding, even though I didn't know it. Now, I might not have had the requisite criminal intent if maybe my accelerator were jammed or something like that, but even though I didn't know the law was 35, I was driving 45, I'm going to get a ticket. And I'm probably going to be prosecuted for that. So how can you say ignorance of the law is an excuse in Mrs. Clinton's case?
Well, the comparison to petty offenses I don't think is useful, but the question of ignorance of the law is no excuse. But here's the distinction. You have to have general criminal intent. You don't need to know what particular statute you're violating, but you must be aware of the generally wrongful nature of your conduct.
So Congress, when they enacted that statute, said gross negligence. Yep. That doesn't say intent. So what are we going to have to enact to get you guys to prosecute something based on negligence or gross negligence? So we're going to have to add, and oh, by the way, we really do mean you don't have to have intent there?
Well, that's a conversation for you all to have with the Department of Justice, but it would have to be something more than the statute enacted in 1917, because for 99 years they've been very worried about its constitutionality.
All right. Well, I think that's something this committee and Congress as a whole, the Judiciary Committee, that Mr. Chaffetz and I also sit on, will be looking at it. And I was on television this morning, and I just want to relay a question that I received from a caller into that television commercial. And it's just real simple. Why should any person follow the law if our leaders don't? And we can argue about intent or not, but you laid out the fact that she basically broke the law, but you couldn't prove intent. Maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but I do want to know why any person should follow the law if our leaders don't have to. And maybe that's rhetorical, but I'll give you an opportunity to comment on that.
Yeah, that's a question I'm no more qualified to answer than any American citizen. It's an important question. In terms of my work, in my world, my folks would not be, one of my employees would not be prosecuted for this. They would face consequences for this. So the notion that it's either prosecute or you walk around, smiling all day long is just not true for those people who work for the government. The broader question is one for a democracy to answer. It's not for me.
And I guess the ultimate decision as to whether or not Mrs. Clinton works in government or not is in everybody's hands.
I thank the gentleman.
Yield back.
We'll now recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Boyle, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Comey, for appearing, especially on such short notice. I want to share with you actually something a friend of mine was expressing when watching your press conference 48 hours ago, and this is someone who's not in any way political. In fact, probably typical of most American citizens today in being depressed about the remarkable level of cynicism we have in our government, that specifically those of us who are in government make decisions first and foremost because of the party hat we wear and not necessarily based on the facts and the evidence. And he texted me after watching your 15-minute presentation, oh, it's nice to see a real pro. You can tell that he would make the decision based on the facts and the evidence and not what party he wears. I think that's so important if we're ever going to get to a place in this country where we restore some of the faith that we had in government. If you look at the poll numbers from 1940s and 1950s, and you look at faith in government among the American public, and you look at those numbers today, the numbers today are anemic. They're nowhere near the levels that they were decades ago. So for that, I want to say thank you, and I think that many citizens have the same impression. When I first met you a couple years ago at a weekend session in Colonial Williamsburg, you might remember that we had a discussion about my biggest concern, frankly, facing the security of the American people, and that is the possibility of a lone wolf terrorist, someone becoming self-radicalized and acting based on that. We had an exchange that I'll keep private, but I think I can characterize that you share my concern. I'm just thinking for the last 2.5 hours that we've been here, we've had the FBI director asking questions on this matter when, frankly, I would have much rather your time spent dealing with the potential of lone wolf terrorists and other coordinated attacks that we face. But since this is the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, trying to find something that we can now take and possibly use in a systemic way, not just the celebrity of Secretary Clinton and the fact, because it involves her, let's face it, that's the reason why we're here. But I want to try to take something out of this very expensive and long investigation and try to use it in a productive way toward reforming government that possibly we can get something good out of it. So toward that end, I'm really concerned about this issue of up-classification. Because it seems as if, and I was not aware of this until the investigation, there is quite a strong discrepancy between not just former Secretary Clinton, but even former Secretary Powell, what he thinks should be classified, and then what is classified after the fact. And I think if I'm right, there were some 2,000 emails that were up-classified. I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah, it actually was not a concept I was real familiar with before this. It's the notion that something might not have been classified at the time, but that in hindsight, as a government agency considers releasing it, they raise the classification level to protect it because it's a candid assessment of a foreign leader or something like that. I think it is largely a State Department thing because their diplomats will often be conversing in an unclassified way that when they look at releasing it in response to a FOIA request, they think it ought to be protected in some fashion. But honestly, I kind of pushed those to the side.
Right.
The important thing here was what was classified at the time. That's what matters.
Right. And that, for a law enforcement official, matters. But I'm just wondering if you could share with us any of your impressions about a system that exists where there is such gray area and discrepancy in what is classified and what's not. And if you or your agents had any suggestions for us, either in government reform, or I happen to be in the Foreign Affairs Committee that is oversight of State Department, do you believe that this is a matter that we should take up where there is such discrepancy in what's classified, what's not classified? I think of one example, Ambassador Ross put something in a book that wasn't classified and then was up-classified after the book came out. Well, what good does that do us as a country in terms of trying to protect the intelligence of the United States?
Yeah, I'm not an expert in this up-classification business, but I do suspect it would be a fertile ground for trying to figure out whether there are ways to do it in a more predictable, reliable way.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for your service, and I yield back my time.
Thank the gentleman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss, for 5 minutes.
Director Comey, your statement on Tuesday clearly showed that Secretary Clinton not only was extremely careless in handling classified information, but that also any reasonable person should have known better, and that also in doing so she put our national security at risk with her reckless behavior. So it seems to me that the American people are only left, based on your assessment, with just a few options. Either Secretary Clinton herself is not a reasonable person, or she is someone who purposefully, willfully exhibited disregard for the law, or she is someone who sees herself as above the law. And to muddy the water even further, after listening to you lay out the facts of the investigation, much of what you said directly contradicted her in previous statements that she had made. I think it's all this compiled, connecting the dots that so many American people are irate that after all of this, there was not a recommendation for Secretary Clinton to be prosecuted. Now, I do greatly appreciate the fact that you came out with much more information on this than you would have in other cases. And I think that was the right thing to do. Undeniably, this is not a typical case. This is something of great public interest. Obviously, the subject of the investigation, former Secretary of State, former Senator, and all those things that we have talked about, former First Lady and so forth. And in addition to this, her husband, who happens to be the former President of the United States, is meeting privately with the Attorney General right before all of this interview takes place. Obviously, this is very suspicious, just the optics of it all. And at the same time that you're coming out, or more or less the same time that you are announcing the decision, Secretary Clinton is flying around in Air Force One with the president doing a campaign event. I mean, there's nothing about this case that's ordinary. There's nothing about the subject that's ordinary. So let me ask you this, Director. Did Secretary Clinton, in fact, comply with the department's policies or the Federal Records Act?
I don't think so. I know you have the State Inspector General here who's more of an expert on all the department's policies, but at least in some respects, no.
So keeping the servers at home and all these types of things obviously is not in compliance with the department's policies.
Yes, and I've read the Inspector General's report on that. That's part of the reason I can answer that part with some confidence.
Okay, and yet she said publicly that she fully complied. So there again is another issue. If you had the same set of facts, but a different subject, a different individual involved, say just an average, ordinary State Department employee or an anonymous contractor, what would have been the outcome?
I'm highly confident there would be no criminal prosecution, no matter who it was. There would be some range of discipline. They might get fired, they might lose their clearance, they might get suspended for 30 days. There'd be some discipline, maybe just a reprimand. I doubt it. I think it'd be higher on the discipline spectrum, but some sort of discipline.
So is it your opinion that there should likewise be some discipline in this case?
Yeah, that's not for me to say. I can talk about what would happen if it was a government employee under my responsibility.
Well, then what you're laying out is that there is a double standard. For someone else, a different subject, an anonymous contractor or someone at the State Department, there would absolutely be discipline. But because of who the subject is, you're not willing to say there should be discipline. So there's, again, this whole issue. This is what the American people are so upset about. Let me say that when you stated that no reasonable prosecutor would pursue this case, is that because the subject of this investigation was unique?
No. There's no double standard there. And there's no double standard either in the sense that if it was John Doe, former government employee, you'd be in the same boat. We wouldn't have any reach on the guy. He wouldn't be prosecuted.
But he would have some discipline.
Well, not if he had left government service.
Had they lied about having servers, had they lied about sending and receiving classified emails, had they lied about not deleting those emails to the public, had they lied about not having any marked classified, the statements are clearly documented, and you're saying that an average person would experience discipline by your own words, but Secretary Clinton does not deserve to be disciplined.
The gentleman's time has expired, but the director may answer if he wants to.
An average employee still in government service would be subject to a disciplinary process. Now, if they'd left, you'd be in the same boat.
The gentleman from Georgia yields back. The chair will now recognize his friend from Vermont, Mr. Welch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Comey. A prosecutor has really awesome power. The power to prosecute is the power to destroy, and it has to be used with restraint. You obviously know that. You're being asked to, you have had to exercise that responsibility in the context of a very contested presidential campaign, enormous political pressure. You had to do it once before. And I go back to that evening of March 10, 2004, when the question was whether a surveillance program authorized after 9/11 by President Bush was going to continue, despite the fact that the Justice Department had come to an independent legal conclusion that it actually violated our constitutional rights. That's a tough call because America was insecure. The President was asserting his authority as Commander-in-Chief to take an action that was intended to protect the American people. But you and others in the Justice Department felt that whatever that justification was, the Constitution came first, and you were going to defend it. And as I understand it, you were on your way home and had to divert your drivers to go back to the hospital to be at the bedside of a very sick, at that time, Attorney General. And you had to stand in the way of the White House Chief of Staff and the White House Counsel. I'm not sure that was a popular decision or one that you could have confidently thought would be a career booster. But I want to thank you for that. Fast forward, we've got this situation of a highly contested political campaign. And there is substantive concern that's legitimate by Democrats and Republicans for independent political reasons. But you had to make a call that was based upon your view of the law, not your view of how it would affect the outcome of who would be the next commander-in-chief. Others have asked this for you, but I think I'm close to the end. I want to give you a chance to just answer, I think, the bottom line questions here. Had you, after your thorough investigation, found evidence that suggested that criminal conduct occurred, is there anything, or anyone that could have held you back from deciding to prosecute?
No. I mean, I don't have the power to decide prosecution, but I'd have worked very hard to make sure that a righteous case was prosecuted.
And you would have made that recommendation to the Attorney General?
Yes.
Was there any interference, implicit or explicit, from the President of the United States or anyone acting on his behalf to influence the outcome of your investigation and the recommendation that you made?
No.
Was there anyone in the Hillary Clinton campaign or Hillary Clinton herself who did anything directly or indirectly to attempt to influence the conclusion that you made to recommend no prosecution?
No.
At this moment, after having been through several hours of questioning, is there anything in the questions you've heard that would cause you to change the decision that you made?
No. I don't love this, but it's really important to do. And I understand the questions and concerns. I just want the American people to know we really did this the right way. You can disagree with us, but you cannot fairly say we did it in any kind of political way. We don't carry water for anybody. We're trying to do what the right thing is.
Well, I very much appreciate that, and I very much appreciate that it takes strong people of independent judgment to make certain that we continue to be a nation of laws. Mr. Chairman, just one final thing, I'll yield to Mr. Cummings. We've got a political debate where a lot of these issues that are going to be, that have been raised, are going to be fought in the campaign. And we've got Secretary Clinton who's going to have to defend what she did. She's acknowledged it's a mistake. We've got that great constitutional scholar, Mr. Trump, who's going to be making his case about why this was wrong. But that's politics. That's not really having anything to do with the independence of prosecutorial discretion. Thank you, Director Comey. And I yield whatever additional time I have to Mr. Cummings.
I think the gentleman's going to yield back. I spoke with Mr. Cummings, so. Yeah. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massey, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Director Comey, for showing up and your willingness to be transparent and answer a lot of unanswered questions. A few hours before this hearing started, I went onto social media and asked people to submit questions. And I've got over 500 questions, and I don't think I'll get to ask them all in these 5 minutes. But I'm sure you'll be willing to answer them. One of the common themes that I came in here to ask, but I realize it's not the right question now, is what's the difference between extremely careless and gross negligence? But in the process of this hearing, what I'm hearing you say is that's not what your reluctance is based on. It's not based on a reluctance to prosecute, by the way. Your reluctance to recommend a prosecution or an indictment is not based on parsing those words. It's based on your concern for this statute, with this statute. Is that correct from your opening statement?
It's broader than that, actually, the statute, and it fits within a framework of fairness, and also my understanding of what the Department of Justice has prosecuted over the last 50 years.
So when you say a reasonable prosecutor wouldn't take this case, it's not because you don't think she that she lied in public or that maybe she was negligent. It's because you have concern with the prosecutorial history of this statute.
And not just that statute, but also 1924, which is the misdemeanor. I also don't see cases that were prosecuted on facts like these.
But
both 793 and 1924.
But you did find one prosecution, and has it been overturned by the Supreme Court?
No, there was one time it was charged in an espionage case, and the guy ended up pleading guilty to a different offense, so it was never adjudicated.
So, your concern is with the negligence threshold, that you think it requires mens rea or knowing the crime. But in all 50 states, isn't there a negligent homicide statute, and aren't people prosecuted for that all the time? And doesn't the Supreme Court and all the courts below that uphold those prosecutions just on the basis of negligence?
I don't know whether all 50 states. I think negligent homicide and manslaughter statutes are relatively common.
Okay, so but don't all 50 states have something like that, and aren't those sustained in the upper courts, those convictions?
I don't know whether all 50 states have something like that, but again, I think it's very common, and I think those are sustained.
So don't we have a history of, you implied that the American judicial system doesn't have a history of convicting somebody for negligence. But don't we in other domains of justice?
We do. I know the federal system best. There are very few in the federal system. They're mostly, as we talked about earlier, in the environmental and food and drug administration area.
Thank you. Now, I want to ask another question that's come up here. You've basically related to us that this information, this top secret or classified information, got into these email chains because of conversations people were having. They were relating what they heard before in other settings. Is that correct?
No. Maybe in some cases, but it was people having an email conversation about a classified subject.
Okay, so they were having an email conversation, but how in this email conversation did this bore marking show up? Like, if they're not sophisticated enough, as you said before, even Hillary Clinton wasn't sophisticated enough to recognize a bore marking to see with the parentheses for confidential or classified, if they weren't that sophisticated, how did they recreate that bore marking in their emails when they're having these discussions?
Yes, a lot of what ended up on Secretary Clinton's server were stuff that had been forwarded up a chain, gets to her from her staff, a lot of that forwarding, and then she comments sometimes on it. Someone down in the chain, in typing a paragraph that summarized something, put a portion marking, C, paren, on that paragraph.
Doesn't it take a lot of intent to take a classified document from a setting that's authorized and secure to one that's not? Wouldn't it require intent for somebody to recreate that classification marking in an unsecure setting?
I don't know. It's possible, but also
did they accidentally type open parentheses C, close parentheses, and indent the paragraph?
Oh, no, you wouldn't accidentally type.
Right, so
someone
it takes
down
intent.
The chain.
Right.
Someone down the chain.
Okay, so this is my question: is someone down the chain being investigated? Because they had the intent clearly. If they had the sophistication, which Hillary Clinton, you insinuate, may have lacked, if they had the sophistication to know what this bore marking was, they had to have the intent to recreate it, or the intent to cut, copy, paste from a secure system to an unsecure system. Wouldn't that be correct?
Potentially, but there's not an open criminal investigation of that person way down the chain.
Shouldn't there be?
A criminal investigation?
An investigation if there's intent, which is what and I think you may be reasonable in requiring that threshold, but don't we treat everybody the same, whether at the top of the chain or the bottom of the chain?
Sure, you want to if the conduct is the same, but we did not criminally investigate whoever started that chain and put the C on that on those paragraphs. We did.
Okay, I would suggest maybe you might want to do that, and I will yield back to the chairman.
I thank the gentleman. We'll now recognize the gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Lawrence, for 5 minutes.
Director Comey, how many years have you been the director?
3 years. I know the exact day count, I think, at this point.
So how many cases have you investigated approximately that you had to render a decision?
The Bureau investigates tens of thousands of cases. The director only gets involved in a very small number of them.
So about how many?
I think I've been deeply involved in probably 10 to 20.
Have you ever been called before Congress on any of those other decisions?
No, this is the first time.
Thank you. There are some Republicans who support you. Not surprisingly, they're the ones who actually know you. And I have a letter here, and I would like to enter into the record from Richard Painter, Mr. Chair. He was President Bush's chief ethics lawyer. And may it be entered into the record?
She's asking unanimous consent. Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Painter refers to Mr. Comey as a man of, and I quote, a man of the utmost integrity who calls the shots as he saw them without regard to political affiliation or friendship. He states, and I quote, throughout the FBI investigation of Secretary Clinton's email server, I have been convinced that the director would supervise the investigation with being impartial and strict adherence to the law, as well as prosecutorial precedent. He also adds, although I'm aware of very few prosecutions for carelessness in handling classified information as opposed to intentional disclosure, I knew that the director would recommend prosecution in any and all circumstances where it was warranted. I cannot think of someone better suited to handle such a politically sensitive investigation. Finally, and I quote, I urge all members of the United States Congress to stop from inferring in specific decisions, particularly those involving political allies or opponents. During my tenure in the White House, there were very unfortunate allegations that powerful senators sought politically motivating firing of United States attorney. Whether or not such allegations were true, it is imperative, and I'm still quoting, that members of the Senate or the House never again conduct themselves in a manner where such interference could be suspected. And I want to be on the record, I wholeheartedly agree with Mr. Painter. Director, you have demonstrated yourself, you sat here and asked the questions, and I would never oppose to finding the answers to any situation that is directly related to federal agencies, which we on this committee are responsible for. But I want to be clear that Congress has no business interfering with these types of decisions that are coming in your responsibility. These type of attacks are not only inappropriate, but they're dangerous. They're dangerous because they could have a chilling effect on the future investigations. And I asked that question, how long have you been in this position? How many times have you made decisions and it were not pulled in 24 hours before this committee? How many times? And then we say it's not political. And you have said repeatedly, regardless of who it was, you conducted the investigation as required under your responsibility. And here you have Republicans who are saying you are an honorable man. And till this day, I have not heard any complaints of your judgment. So I sit here today as a member of Congress on the record that the slippery slope that we're seeing today in this hearing, I want every member to be cautious of what we're saying, that in America, when we have investigations, that we will allow our own elected Congress and Senate to make this a political agenda to attack, but only if it's in their agenda. This goes for Democrats and Republicans. We are not here to do that. Thank you, and I yield back my time.
Thank the gentlewoman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Blum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Comey, for being here today, and thanks for hanging in there till every last question is answered. I'm not a lawyer. That's the good news. I'm a career businessman. I've spent most of my career operating in the high-tech industry. And today I've heard words such as common sense, reasonable person, carelessness, judgment, or lack thereof. I like these words. I understand these words. I think the average American does as well. So I'd like to focus on that. Last Tuesday, Director Comey, you said, and I quote, "None of these emails should have been on any kind of an unclassified system, but their presence is especially concerning because all these emails were housed on unclassified personal servers, not even supported by full-time security staff, like those found at agencies of the United States government, or even with a commercial email service such as Gmail." Director Comey, my small Iowa business doesn't even use Gmail for our email because it's not secure enough. I know some security experts in the industry. I check with them. The going rate to hack into somebody's Gmail account, $129. For corporate emails, they can be hacked for $500 or less. If you want to hack into an IP address, it's around $100. Now, I'm sure the FBI could probably do it cheaper. This is the going rate. Director Comey, are you implying in that statement that the private email servers of Secretary Clinton's were perhaps less secure than a Gmail account that is used for free by 1 billion people around this planet?
Yes, and I'm not looking to pick on Gmail. Their security is actually pretty good. The weakness is in the individual users. But yes, Gmail has full-time security staff and thinks about patching and logging and protecting their systems in a way that was not the case here.
I'd like to ask you, what kind of judgment, we're talking a lot about judgment today, does this decision to potentially expose to hackers classified information on email service that's less secure than Gmail, your words, what does that suggest to you? What type of judgment does that suggest to you?
It suggests the kind of carelessness that I talked about.
In August of last year, Secretary Clinton was asked by Ed Henry of Fox News whether she had wiped her entire server, meaning did she delete all the emails on her server? Her response, "You mean with a cloth?" March of 2015, during a press conference, Secretary Clinton assured us her private email server was secure, saying the server was on private property guarded by the Secret Service. Now, this would be laughable if it wasn't so serious. I know, you know, my constituents in eastern Iowa know you don't need to be a cat burglar to hack into an email server, and you don't need a cloth to wipe a server clean. One would think that a former United States Senator, one would think that a former Secretary of State would know this as well. Would you agree with that statement?
You would think, although as I said before, one of the things I've learned in this case is that the Secretary may not have been as sophisticated as people assume. She didn't have a computer in her office at the State Department, for example. So I don't think, so I would assume the same thing about someone who'd been a senator and a high-ranking official. I'm not sure it's a fair assumption in this case.
In your opinion, Director Comey, did Secretary Clinton know that a server could in fact be wiped clean electronically and not with a cloth?
Well, I assume that I don't.
Would you assume she knows that?
I would assume that it was a facetious comment about a cloth, but I don't know. I don't know in particular on that one.
Would you also assume, Director, that Secretary Clinton knew that a server could be wiped clean electronically, that it could be hacked electronically, not physically? You don't need a cat burglar to hack a server. Would you assume, would that be reasonable to assume she knows that?
To some level, it would be reasonable, to some level of understanding.
Then once again, for someone who knew these things, or we assume to some level she knew these things, what kind of judgment does a decision to expose classified material on personal servers suggest to you? What type of judgment?
Well, again, it's not my place to assess judgment. I talk in terms of state of mind, negligence in particular. I think there was carelessness here, and in some circumstances, extreme carelessness.
Was her server hacked?
I don't know. I can't,
So
can't prove that it was hacked.
So that answer says to me it could have been hacked.
Sure, yeah.
And if it was hacked, potentially damaging material, damaging to American secrets, damaging to American lives, could have been hacked, could have been exposed, correct? Lives could have been put at risk if that server was indeed hacked.
I'm not prepared to say yes as to that last piece. That would require me going into, in a way I can't here, the nature of the classified information, but there's no doubt that it would have potentially exposed information that was classified. Information is classified because it could damage the United States of America.
So it could have happened. The FBI just isn't aware.
Correct.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. I yield back the time I do not have.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentlelady from New Jersey, Ms. Watson Coleman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you, Director. I've got a number of questions, so I'm going to zip through these.
Okay.
This is the question I'm going to ask you, and you may not even have the answer to it because you may not have known this. This is about the classification marking issue that you've been asked about earlier. According to the State Department, which addressed this issue yesterday, a spokesman said that the call sheets appear to bear classified markings, but this was actually a mistake. To quote, generally speaking, there's a standard process for developing call sheets for the Secretary of State. Call sheets are often marked, but it's not untypical at all for them to be marked at the confidential level prior to a decision by the Secretary that he or she will make that call. Oftentimes, once it is clear the Secretary intends to make a call, the Department will then consider the call sheet SBU, sensitive but unclassified or unclassified altogether, and then mark it appropriately and prepare it for the Secretary's use in actually marking the call. The classifications of a call sheet, therefore, is not necessarily fixed in time, and staffers in the Secretary's office who are involved in preparing and finalizing these call sheets, they understand that. Given this context, it appears that markings in the documents raised in the media reports were no longer necessary or appropriate at the time they were sent as an actual email. Those markings were a human error. They didn't need to be there. Did you know this?
No.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Can you tell me, based upon your information, has there been and is there any evidence that our national security has been breached or at risk as a result of these emails and their being on this server? Is there any evidence?
There's no direct evidence of an intrusion.
Thank you very much. I have to tell you that while I think that this should conclude this discussion, I know we're going to hear this issue ad nauseum. But I am concerned about another issue that I think really is resonating with the people in this country. And that issue has to do with experiences that we had just the last 2 days. Mr. Director, I want to bring this up for your consideration because I want to ask you, what can the FBI do in this issue? This morning we woke up to another graphic and deeply disturbing video that actually brought me to tears when my staff played it for me, wherein a Minnesota woman's boyfriend has been shot as her young child sat in the back seat after apparently telling the officer he was licensed to carry a weapon. He had it on him and was going to reach for his identification. Just the other day, there was an incident in Baton Rouge involving a Mr. Alton Sterling, an African-American man who was shot while pinned to the ground by police officers in Baton Rouge. An interaction tape by two bystanders with cell phones captured this. So I think that we've got an issue here, an issue of real national security. And I want to ask you, Mr. Director, do we have an opportunity to direct our time and resources in your department to those issues? Is it not important that we say their names to remind people of the loss of a Tamir Rice, to an Eric Garland, to an Alton Sterling, to a John Crawford III, to a Michael Brown, to a Walter Scott, and even a Sandra Bland? Deaths in the hands of police custody or by police happening? Are these not happening at an alarming rate? And is this not a legitimate space for the FBI to be working in?
Yes is the emphatic answer. Those are incredibly important matters. As you know, the FBI spends a lot of time on them because they're very, very important. We have an investigation open on the Baton Rouge case. I was briefed this morning on the Minnesota case, and I would expect we'll be involved in that as well. It's an important part of our work.
Do you feel that you have the sufficient resources from the legal imperative to the funding to address these cases and what seems to be a disturbing pattern in our country today?
I'm a bad bureaucrat, but I believe I have sufficient resources, and we are applying them against those situations because I believe the individual cases matter enormously, but also the people's confidence in law enforcement is one of the bedrocks of this great country of ours. So I have the resources, and we're applying them too.
And in addition, we believe that our law enforcement is by and large of high integrity and has a desire to keep us protected and safe. But when we find out that there are these occasions and when there is an indication that there's a pattern that is taking place in this country, we have a responsibility to ensure that everyone in this country is safe. And simply because you're a black man or a black woman does not make you a target. Thank you. I yield back my time.
Thank the gentlewoman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Comey, for being here. There are a few things in this town that people agree on both sides of the aisle, and one of them is your reputation. I'm reminded of the passage in James, swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. I am a little disappointed in some of the things that I've heard from my colleagues about some of the attacks on your character and your integrity. I haven't heard those, and I hope that that we have you've not experienced that. I also struggle with the change of heart that we're hearing today because I have a list of elected officials who have questioned your investigation, even attacked it. In fact, the former President Clinton said this is a game. In fact, just last Friday, Ms. Wasserman Schultz, Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz, said Secretary Clinton is not the target of this investigation or whatever you want to call it. My question to you today is, do you feel like this has been a Republican witch hunt? This hearing?
No.
Okay, thank you for
I said
clearing
at the
that.
beginning, I understand people's questions and interest, and I'm a huge fan of transparency. I think that's what makes our democracy great.
And I think goes to one of the reasons of why you are so respected. To me, this hearing is about understanding and disseminating the facts and how you saw them and how the American public sees them, and specifically in the areas of where there was wrongdoing admitted under your investigation, where there was obviously breaking the law, but also some cover-ups. Did Congress ask you to pursue this investigation?
No, it was a referral from the Inspector General of the intelligence community.
So it wasn't Republicans either, was it?
No.
How did you go about collecting the evidence?
We used the tools that we normally use in a criminal investigation.
Do you receive a congressional referral for all the information that you collected?
Not to my knowledge.
Well, then, one of the things that I'm struggling with, or that I would like to know specifically, is under oath, Ms. Clinton made these three comments that we now know are untrue in the Benghazi hearing. Number one, she's turned over all her work-related emails. Number two, telling the committee that her attorneys went through every single email. And then finally, and probably the one that continues to stick the most, there was, and I quote, nothing marked classified on my emails, end quote. Now, earlier, when the chairman questioned you about this, you said something about needing a congressional referral recommendation. My question is, something of this magnitude, why, or can you help me understand why didn't it rise to your investigation or someone bringing that to your knowledge as far as saying this is a problem, here she is, again, the Secretary Clinton lying under oath, specifically about our investigation?
Well, we, out of respect for the legislative branch being a separate branch, we do not commence investigations that focus on activities before Congress without Congress asking us to get involved. That's a long-standing practice of the Department of Justice and the FBI. So we don't watch on TV and say we ought to investigate that. Joe Smith said this in front of the committee. It requires the committee to say, we think we have an issue here. Would you all take a look at it?
But with all due respect, if you have the Secretary Clinton who is under oath speaking about your very investigation, and you've talked about your wonderful staff and certainly have no reason to deny that, why wouldn't that rise to the level of suspicion that here she is saying this under oath? I mean, lying under oath is a crime, is it not?
Yes.
And what's the penalty on that? That's considered perjury, right?
Perjury. It's a felony. I forget the exact. It's potentially years in prison.
But I don't understand. Would you help me understand why somebody wouldn't have tipped you off that she's talking about the very specific case under oath that you're investigating?
Well, there's a difference between us being aware of testimony and us opening a criminal investigation for potential perjury. Again, it's not this case in particular, but all cases. We don't do that without committee saying we think there was an issue in testimony given in this separate branch of the government.
You also mentioned earlier, and it's been quoted several times, that no reasonable prosecutor would move forward with some of the facts. Is there any room at all that somebody would differ a little bit on the opinion? I know that former United States Attorney General Michael Mukasey said with the illegal server, it disqualifies for her from ever holding any federal office. So there are some people of high esteem that may differ, obviously not privy to the exact facts, but can you make any room? You said no reasonable person. Do you understand why the American people, or would you understand why other people may say that she has stepped across the line or broken enough law here that you would come to a different conclusion?
Sure, I respect different opinions. My only point is, and I said earlier, I smile because those folks are my friends. I've worked with them for a long time. None of those guys in my position, I believe, knowing what I know, would think about it differently. But I also respect that they have a different view from the outside.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Desaunier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, I just want to thank you, as others have, and I know you don't need this, but I think the American people clearly need to hear it. You've done a wonderful job today, but there are moments in my political life, and as American, I despair for the future of this country. Not often, but in those moments comes an individual like yourself, either by providence or good fortune or by the framework of the U.S. Constitution. And I really believe you've served this country and all Americans well, irrespective of their party affiliation. So really two lines of questions, I should say. One is, and another colleague has brought this up, but you mentioned just previous testimony about the bedrock and the importance of public confidence in public safety institutions, yours and all's. So I just want to give you an opportunity. I think you've responded to this multiple times, but give you a little more opportunity because I think it's important for the American public to know that the system isn't rigged, that there are people such as yourself and the 15 individuals who worked on this case and others that do their job and believe in the Constitution of the United States. And if you have any further comments about comments that would say that the system's rigged and Americans should give up on the system.
No, one of the reasons I welcome this opportunity to have this conversation is I was raised by great parents who taught me you can't care what other people think about you. Actually, in my business, I have to and deeply do that people have confidence that the system's not fixed against black people, for rich people, for powerful people. It's very, very important that the American people understand that there really are people that you pay for with your tax dollars who don't give a rip about Democrats or Republicans or this or that, who care about finding out what is true. And I am lucky to lead an organization that is that way to its core. I get a 10-year term to ensure that I stay outside of politics, but in a way it's easy. I lead an organization that is resolutely apolitical. We are tough, aggressive people. If we can make a case, we'll make a case. We do not care what the person's stripes are or what their bank account looks like. And I worry very much when people doubt that. It's the reason I did the press conference I did 2 days ago. I care about the FBI's reputation. I care about the Justice Department. I care about the whole system deeply. And so I decided I'm going to do something no director's ever done before. I'm not going to tell the Attorney General or anybody else what I'm going to say or even that I'm going to say it. They didn't know, nor did the media know, until I walked out what I was going to talk about. And then I offered extraordinary transparency, which I'm sure confused and bugged a lot of people. It's essential in this democracy that people see as much as they can so they can make their judgment. Again, they may conclude I'm an idiot, I should reason differently, but what I hope they will not conclude is that I am a dishonest person.
I am here trying to do the right thing in the right way, and I lead 36,000 people who have that as their spine. That's what I want them to know. I don't care that people agree or disagree. That's what's wonderful about our democracy. But at its core, you need to know there are good people trying to do the right thing all day long, and you pay for them, and we'll never forget that.
I appreciate that. And within the context of these are human institutions, pretty clear to me as a non-lawyer that you had a bright line in terms of your decision about pursuing prosecution. But you did spend an extended period of time talking about what I think I take from you as being fairly objective analysis of what was careless in terms of handling of it, either ascribed to the former Secretary of State or to the Department. And you said, and I quote during your comments, while not the focus of our investigation, we also developed evidence that a security culture of the State Department in general and with respect to the use of unclassified email systems in particular was generally lacking in the kind of care for classified information found elsewhere in the government. That's accurate, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
So struggling with this, and this is in the context of this hearing, Oversight and State Department in this committee, as to how do we go from here and be clearer about how the State Department, we'll talk about this with the IG, and some of the comments that former Secretary Powell has made, including that the absurdity of the retroactive classification, and that now we have 1,000 of these emails from Secretary Clinton that's out in the public and are being spread even further. So there are other people involved. Sitting there, how does this committee go forward to make sure that the State Department can still function in the way it does with human beings and have conversations that are both transparent but also national security? What are the things we need to do to make sure that this doesn't happen again?
Well, I think a good start, I think the reason the chairman has the IG from the State Department here is to start that conversation. The IG knows deeply the culture of a department and is far better equipped than I to say you ought to focus here, you ought to focus there to make it better. So I think that's the place to start.
Thank you, Mr. Director.
Thank you,
I yield back.
Thank you. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Desjardins, for 5 minutes.
Director Comey, thank you for appearing so quickly on short notice. I think it's really important that you're here because of the way you laid out the case on Tuesday. There is a perception that you felt one way and then came to another conclusion. I, like many of my colleagues, put a post up back in my district and let them know you were coming. And in less than 24 hours, I had 750 questions sent to ask you. So again, thank you for being here. But a common theme, just to summarize a lot of those concerns, were that in this case, Clinton was above the law, that there was a double standard, and a lot of that was based on the way you presented your findings. Now, your team, you said you did not personally interview her on Saturday, but your team did for about 3.5 hours, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know, in reading the review or the summary, did they ask Hillary Clinton about her comment that she had never sent or received classified information over private email?
I think so, but I can't remember specifically.
Okay.
It's a very long 302.
Okay.
I'd have to check.
And we'll get access to that. Do you know if they asked her when she said that there was nothing marked classified on my email sent or received?
Same answer. I'm not sure.
And so the same answer then when she said, I did not email any classified material to anyone on my email, there is no classified material. You don't know whether they asked her that?
I don't know whether they asked her that question. The entire interview was focused on. So what did you know? What did you see? What is this document? That kind of thing.
Do you know if they asked her whether she stands by the fact that she said she just used one device and that was for her convenience?
I don't know. I know they established from talking to her she used many devices during her 4 years. So I don't know whether they asked her specifically about that statement.
Okay, I guess
that's easy to check, though.
I guess my point is you're trying to get inside the head of Hillary Clinton in this investigation and know whether there was intent. And so we all know what she told the people. That's been well documented. She said that she did not do those things, that she did not send or receive classified emails, that she used one server and one device for her convenience. And since then, I think even in your statement, you recognize that those were not correct. Is that fair?
I really don't want to get in the business of trying to parse and judge her public statements, and so I think I've tried to avoid doing that sitting here.
Why do you feel that's important?
Because what matters to me is what did she say to the FBI? That's obviously first and foremost for us.
Right.
Our
and honest people don't need to lie. Is that right?
Honest people don't need to lie? I hope not.
Okay. Well, in this case, for some reason, she felt the need to misrepresent what she had done with this server all throughout the investigation. And you guys, after a year, brought her in on Saturday, and in 3.5 hours came out with the conclusion that she shouldn't be prosecuted because there was no intent. Is that right?
No.
Okay, so, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is it fair to say that your interpretation of Hillary Clinton's handling of top secret information, classified documents, was extremely careless?
Yes.
And is it fair to say that you said that you went on to define extremely careless, that Hillary Clinton's handling of top secret information was sloppy or represents sloppiness?
Yeah, that's another way of trying to express
Okay.
the same concept.
And then just a few minutes ago, you also stated that you now believe that Hillary Clinton is not nearly as sophisticated as people thought. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's fair, actually. No, not as people thought, but as people would assume about somebody with that background.
Okay, so
I'm sorry, I should be clear about this. Technically sophisticated. I'm not opining on other kinds of sophistication.
all right. In the last minute, Director, I want to talk a little bit about precedent, because I think my colleague Trey Gowdy made a great point that there still is really no precedence in terms of punishment for this type of behavior. Are you familiar with Brian Nishimura's case?
Yes.
Okay, he's a naval reservist, for those who don't know, and he was prosecuted. What is the difference between his case and Hillary Clinton's case in terms of extremely carelessness and gross negligence? Because we're dealing with Statute 793, Section F, where it does not require intent. Is that correct?
No, I'm sorry, 793F is the gross negligence standard. That's
Right,
1917.
right. And is that why Brian Nishimura was punished?
No, Nishimura was prosecuted under the misdemeanor statute 1924
Okay.
on facts that are very different. If you want me to go through them, I'll go through them, but very different than...
Okay, I think that there's been a review of this case, and they're very similar, and that's why people feel that there's a double standard. And
What they're reading in the media is not a complete accounting of the facts in that case.
Well, would you agree then with Representative Gowdy that there still is really no precedence for punishing someone like Hillary Clinton, and she could really go in, potentially be elected president and do this again without fear of being punished?
I don't think I'm qualified to answer that question.
All right, my time's expired. Thank you for your time.
Thank the gentleman. We'll now recognize the gentlewoman from New Mexico, Ms. Lujan Grisham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've had the benefit of when you're last to or nearly last to really have both the benefit and then to question the kinds of statements and the dialogue back and forth. And where I'm settled at this point in time is in a couple of places, but particularly I don't think there's any member in this committee or quite frankly any member in Congress who doesn't both want and expect that the FBI and the Department of Justice to operate in a fair, unbiased, highly independent manner. Otherwise, you can't appropriately uphold or enforce federal law. And while this has been stated in a couple of different ways, I'm going to see if we can't, I want to get direct answers. So, Mr. Comey, is there any evidence, given that that's the standard that we all want, desire, and expect, to suggest that Hillary Clinton was not charged by the Department of Justice due to inappropriate political influence or due to her current or previous public positions?
Zero, and if there is such evidence, I'd love folks to show it to me.
And in that regard, was there a double standard?
No, in fact, I think my entire goal was to avoid a double standard, to avoid what sometimes prosecutors call celebrity hunting and doing something for a famous person that you would never do for an ordinary Joe or Jane.
Thank you. And I really appreciate that you're here today and explaining the process in great detail, frankly. And this committee works at getting specific detail about a variety of reviews, investigations, policies, concepts throughout federal government. And I think I can say that this committee often finds that we don't get very much clarity or specific responses to the majority of questions that we ask. So I really appreciate that. And that in explaining that, what led the FBI to conclude that Hillary Clinton should not be charged. Saying that, however, I'm still concerned, frankly, that the use of this hearing and some of the public statements made by elected officials accusing the Department of Justice of using a double standard without any evidence at all to support that statement, leaning on accusations of such, in fact jeopardizes the very thing that we want the most, which is an apolitical and independent Department of Justice. And we have every right to ask these tough questions. And to be clear that the process that you use for everyone, including elected officials, works, and that there's a responsibility not to substitute your own political preferences for the outcome of an independent and apolitical Department of Justice investigations on any level, whether it involves Hillary Clinton or anybody else. Do you agree with that general statement?
Yes.
For me, that's a really important ethical line that I believe should never be crossed. I worry that some of what we did today could be, frankly, interpreted as violating that very standard. And for that, I certainly want the American people and my constituents who are watching to understand that very important line, and to be sure that our responsibility is better served making sure that we do have, in fact, an independent body whose aim it is to bring about truth and justice and uphold the federal law. And, sir, based on everything that you've said today, I don't see any reason to disagree with your statements, your assessments, or the explanation of that process. With the little time I do have left, I do want to say that given that some of the classified material that we've both debated and talked about today can be classified later or up-classified, or that other agencies have different determinations of what constitutes classified and not, I do think that's a process that warrants refining, and if something can come out of this hearing about making sure that we do something better in the future for everyone, not just appointed or elected officials, that ought to be something that we do. I'm often confused by some of the things that are clearly told to us in a classified briefing that appear to be different or already out in the public in some way, and I'm not sure who's making those decisions. I honor my responsibility to the highest degree, but I think that's a process that could use some significant refining, and that's my only suggestion, sir. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Thank the gentlewoman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Director Comey, thank you for being here today. I appreciate it. I'm over here. Over here. And I'm gonna be real quick and try to be succinct. I want to clarify some things that you said. And look, I don't want to go over everything that everybody's been through today. I mean, we've had some great questions here that have asked you about, you said this, she said that. Representative Gowdy made a great case of, you know, this is what she said under oath and publicly, and yet you dispute that and say, no, this is the case. But look, I've just got a couple of questions, okay? First of all, did I understand you correctly that your decision, that this decision was made within 3.5 hours of an interview, and that was all?
No, we investigated for a year.
You investigate, but you interviewed her for 3.5 hours last week and then came to the conclusion.
Correct. We interviewed her on Saturday for 3.5 hours, the last step in a year-long investigation.
Okay. Now, as I understand it, Hillary Clinton has testified that the servers that she used were always safe and secure. Yet you refute that and say, no, that is not the case at all. Were they ever secure? Were the servers that she were using, were they ever secure?
Well, the challenge, security is not binary, it's just degrees of security. It was less secure than one at the State Department, or as I said, even one at a private commercial provider like a Gmail.
Well, let me ask you this. She's got staff, and she's got people around her. Did they know she was doing this? Did they know that she was using these other devices? Did anybody ever bring it to her attention and say, hey, you're not supposed to be doing that?
I think a lot of people around the Secretary understood she was using a private, personal email setup.
Then why didn't they say something? Don't they have a responsibility as well?
That's an important question that goes to the culture of the State Department that's worth asking.
I mean, look, we all surround ourselves with good people, and we depend on them to help us. I don't understand. Should they be held responsible for that, for not bringing that to someone's attention? If I see someone who's not following protocol, is it my responsibility to report them?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I
Especially
certainly.
when it comes to security matters, you have an obligation to report a security violation that you may witness, whether it's involving you or one of your coworkers. But this is about. So if
what about Brian Pagliano? Did he ever know? Do you know if he knew that she was not following proper protocol here?
He helped set it up.
He helped set it up. So obviously he knew.
Yeah. Obviously he knew that.
Okay. Is anything going to be done to him? Any prosecution or any discipline?
I don't know about discipline, but there's not going to be prosecution of him.
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
My understanding, Director, is that you offered him immunity. Why did you offer him immunity, and what did you get for it?
Yeah, that I'm not sure what I can talk about in open setting about that.
Well, he's not going to be prosecuted, so.
Right, but I want to be careful. I'm doing this 24 hours after the investigation closed. I want to be thoughtful, because we're, as you know, big about the law, that I'm following the law about what I disclose about that. So I'll have to get back to you on that one. I don't want to answer that off the cuff.
Director Comey, I am not a lawyer. I'm not an investigator. I'm a pharmacist. But I'm a citizen, and citizens are upset. I watched with great interest earlier this week when you laid out your case. And I'm telling you, you laid it out, bam, 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 here's what she did wrong, 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 wrong. And then all of a sudden you used the word, however. And it was like you could hear a gasp throughout the country of people saying, oh, here we go again. Do you regret presenting it in a way like that?
No, I'm highly, I think I didn't use the word however. I try never to use that in speaking, but I did lay it out, I thought, in the way that made sense and that I hoped was maximum transparency for people. And
but
I know
that's the point. I'm sorry, but that's the point. It didn't make sense. The way you were laying it out, it would have made sense. And the way that the questions have been asked here, and we've made all these points of where she was obviously told lies under oath, that it would have been, okay, we finally got one here.
Yeah, I think it made sense. I just hope folks go back maybe with a cup of tea and open their minds and read my statement again carefully. But again, if you disagree, that's okay.
But when we look, I've only been here 18 months, and I'm going to tell you, this inside the Beltway mentality, no wonder people don't trust us.
Well, I have no, I don't know who you're talking about. I have no kind of inside the Beltway mentality.
But this is an example of what I'm talking about here. It just was, as a non-lawyer, as a non-investigator, it would appear to me you have got a hell of a case.
Yeah, and I'm telling you we don't, and I hope people will take the time to understand why.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gosar. Oh, let's go ahead and go to the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Mulvaney first.
Thank the gentleman. Director Comey, earlier today you heard a long list of statements that Mrs. Clinton has made previously, both to the public and to Congress, that were not factually accurate. I think he went down the whole long list. When she met with you folks on Saturday last week, I take it she didn't say the same things at that interview?
I'm not equipped sitting here without the 302 in front of me to answer in that broad brush
But
fashion.
it's your testimony.
But I have no basis. We do not have a basis for concluding she lied to the FBI.
Gotcha. Did anybody ask her on Saturday why she told y'all one thing and told us another?
I don't know as I sit here. I mean, I'll figure that out.
Would that have been of interest to you in helping to establish intent?
It could have been, sure.
More importantly, I think, did anybody ask her why she set up the email system as she did in the first place?
Yes.
And the answer was convenience?
Yeah, it was already there. It was a system her husband had, and so she just jumped onto it.
Were you aware that just earlier this week her assistant actually said it was for an entirely different reason? It was to keep emails from being accessible? and that it was for a concealment purpose. She was, Uma Abedin was asked in her deposition why it was set up, and it was said to keep her personal emails from being accessible. Question to whom? To anybody? Were you aware of that testimony?
Generally, yes.
Okay, so here's sort of the summary I take from what we've done today, which is that over the course of the entire system, what she did, she intentionally set up a system. According to your testimony, your findings, she was careless regarding its technical security. I think you've said that even a basic free account, a Gmail account, had better security than she had. And she did that according to her own staffer's sworn deposition for the purpose of preventing access to those emails. As a result of this, she exposed top secret information to potential hack by foreign actors. You've seen the emails, we have not. I think you've said earlier that the emails could be of the sort that would put national security at risk, and I think we had testimony earlier that got you to acknowledge that it might even put our agents overseas at risk.
Yeah, I don't think I agree with that, but it's still important.
Okay, all right. She kept all of that secret until after she left the State Department. She lied about it, or at least made untrue statements about it, after it finally came to light. She thereafter ordered the destruction of evidence that was destroyed so thoroughly that you folks could not do an adequate recovery. Yet she receives no criminal penalty. So I guess this is my question to you. Are we to assume, as we sit here today, that if the next president of the United States does the exact same thing on the day he or she is sworn into office, sets up a private email service for the purpose of concealing information from the public or from anybody, that as a result of that, potentially exposes national security level information to our enemies, lies about it, and then destroys the evidence during an investigation, that there'll be no criminal charges, if you're the FBI director, against that person?
Yeah, that's not a question the FBI director should answer. I mean,
no, I'm asking if she does the exact same thing as president as she's done today, your result will be the exact same as it was 48 hours ago. There'll be no criminal findings, right?
If the facts were exactly the same?
Right.
And the law was exactly the same?
Right.
Yeah, the result would be the same.
And I guess under the theory that if the law is to be equally applied to everybody, that if a White House staffer does the exact same thing for the exact same purpose and exposes the exact same risks, that there'll be no criminal action against that person. That could be, as you've mentioned, administrative penalties. There are no administrative penalties, as I understand it, by the way, against the president, correct?
I don't think so, but I'm not a
I don't think there are
scholar.
either. I don't think you can take away the president's top security clearance, and I'm pretty sure you can't fire the president because we've tried. Not only would a staffer not have any criminal charges brought against them, but I suppose a summer intern could do the exact same thing under the theory that we're going to apply the law equally, regardless of who the people are. My question to you is this, and it's not a legal question. I guess it's a common sense, ordinary question that folks are asking me. From a national security standpoint, somebody who used to lecture on that, does that bother you?
The mishandling of classified information bothers me no matter what circumstance it occurs in, because it has national security implications.
Does it bother you that the precedent that you are setting today may well lead to a circumstance where our top secret information continues to be exposed to our potential enemies?
No, in this sense. The precedent that I'm setting today is my absolute best effort to treat people fairly without regard to who they are. If that continues to be the record of the FBI and the Justice Department, that's what it should be. The rest of the implications in your question are beyond that. They're important, but they're not for the FBI to answer. We should aspire to be apolitical, facts and the law, treat Joe the same as Sally, as Secretary so-and-so. That's my goal.
If you would come to a different decision, by the way, I tend to agree with everything you just said. If you would come to a different decision, do you think that would have a different precedential value that would keep our information more safe?
If we decided to recommend criminal charges here? I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. I could argue it both ways. I guess I'm a lawyer. I can argue everything both ways, but I could argue that both ways.
Thank you, Director Comey. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gosar, for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Comey, for being here. My colleague alluded to Brian Pagliano, the IT advisor, and were you made aware of the deal of immunity with him?
I am aware.
Now that Attorney General Lynch has stated that there will be no charges, there's many that suspect that that he failed to answer questions in his congressional deposition, that he had something to hide. Why did your investigators at the DOJ decide it was necessary to offer Mr. Pagliano immunity?
As I said in response to the earlier question, I need to be more thoughtful about what I say about an immunity deal in public. It may be totally fine. I just don't want to screw up because we're doing this so quickly.
Okay.
In general, I can answer, because I've done it many times as a prosecutor. You make a grant of immunity in order to get information that you don't think you could get otherwise.
But you know that there may be something there in hindsight, right? You're looking ahead because of the pertinent information this person possesses.
Right. You believe they have relevant information to the investigation.
So did the investigators draft an interview report known as a 302 with Mr. Pagliano?
Yes.
Given the importance of this case, will you commit to voluntarily disclosing the 302s for review of Brian Pagliano and other witnesses interviewed as part of your investigation?
I'll commit to giving you everything I can possibly give you under the law and to doing it as quickly as possible. That said, then that means I got to go back and sort it out. For example, the 302 of Secretary Clinton is classified at the TSSCI level, so we got to sort through all that, but we'll do it. We'll do it quickly.
Yeah, I know you've done this because you've done this for Lois Lerner and other cases, so we would expect that. Now, Director Comey, Hillary Clinton testified before Congress and told the American people multiple times that she never emailed any classified information to anyone on her private email servers. Your investigation revealed 110 of Clinton's emails and 52 email chains contain classified information. Clinton told the American people, and I quote, "The laws and regulations in effect when I was Secretary of State allowed me to use my email for work. This is undisputed," end of quote. Your investigation revealed that that also wasn't true. Clinton claims she turned over all her work-related emails. Your investigation revealed that this wasn't also true. Clinton claimed that there was no security breaches and her private servers had numerous safeguards. Your investigation revealed 8 email chains on Clinton's private servers containing top-secret information, and that it was possible hostile actors gained access to sensitive information. Further, multiple people she emailed with regularity were hacked by hostile actors, and her private servers were less secure than a Gmail account, making a security breach all the more likely. Director Comey, it's a federal crime, as you know, to mishandle classified information in a grossly negligent way, and you stated Clinton and her colleagues were extremely careless. Clinton has publicly stated she was well aware of the classification requirements, yet she broke the law anyway. Multiple people have been prosecuted for less, and there is a growing trend of abuses in senior-level employees. The only difference between her and others is her total resistance to acknowledge her irresponsible behavior that jeopardized our national security and the American people. I think you should have recommended Clinton be prosecuted under Section 793 or Section 1024 of Title 18. If not, who? If not now, when? Your recommendation deprived the American people of the opportunity for justice in this matter. There shouldn't be a double standards for the Clintons, and they shouldn't be above the law. With that, I'm going to yield the rest of my time to the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy.
Thank you, Dr. Gozar. Director Comey, I want to go back to the issue of intent for just a second. We can disagree on whether or not it's an element of the offense. Let's assume for the sake of argument that you're right and I'm wrong and that it is an element of the offense. Secretary Clinton said that she was, quote, well aware of classification requirements. Those are her words, not mine and not yours. So if she were, quote, well aware of classification requirements, how did that impact your analysis of her intent? Because I've heard you this morning describe her as being less than sophisticated. She disagrees with that.
Well, I was talking about technical sophistication. The question is, I would hope everybody who works in the government is aware of classification requirements. The question then is, if you mishandled classified information, when you did that thing, did you know you were doing something that was unlawful? That's the intent question.
All right. Well, you and I are going to have to get together some other time and discuss all the people we prosecuted who were unaware that they were breaking the law. There are lots of really dumb defendants out there who don't know that what they're doing is against the law. But let's go with what you say.
I disagree. You may have prosecuted a lot of those folks. I did not prosecute a lot of those folks.
I was a gutter prosecutor and you were a white-collar prosecutor. Trust me, there are lots of people who don't know you can't kill other people. Let me ask you this. On the issue of intent, you say it was convenience, okay? You're a really smart lawyer. If it were convenience, Director, she wouldn't have waited 2 years to return the documents and she wouldn't have deleted them 4 years after they were created. So you can't really believe that her intent was convenience when she never turned them over until Congress started asking for them, could you?
Yeah, my focus, and I hope I made this clear, my focus is on what was the thinking around the classified information. I mean, it's relevant why the system was set up and the thinking there, but she didn't, I don't understand her to be saying, well, I think I've said it already, but that's my focus.
So I know I'm out of time, but it just strikes me you are reading a specific intent element into a gross negligence statute, not even general intent.
Gentleman's
a
time.
Specific intent
Gentleman's time has
element.
expired.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Go. The director can answer.
I enjoy talking with him. The question you got to ask is, so why is it that the Department of Justice, since 1917, has not used that gross negligence statute, but charging it once in an espionage case? And whether their decision was smart or not, that is the record of fairness. And so you have to decide, do I treat this person against that record? And if I do, is that a fair thing to do? Even if you're not worried about the constitutionality of it. And my judgment is no reasonable prosecutor would do that. That would be celebrity hunting. That would be treating this person differently than John Doe.
Director, I want to follow up on that. Why did you do what you did? You know, my interpretation of what the FBI is supposed to be doing is come to a determination of the facts and then turn it over to a prosecutor. You were a prosecutor, but you're not a prosecutor now.
Right.
It is unprecedented that an FBI director gave the type of press conference that he did and took a position that an unreasonable prosecutor would only take this case forward. Why did you do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Everything I did would have been done privately in the normal course. We have great conversations between the FBI and prosecutors. We make recommendations. We argue back and forth. What I decided to do was offer transparency to the American people about the whys of that, what I was going to do, because I thought that was very, very important for their confidence in the system of justice. And within that, their confidence in the FBI. And I was very concerned, if I didn't show that transparency, that in that lack of transparency, people would say, geez, what's going on here? Something seems squirrely here. And so I said, I will do something unprecedented, because I think this is an unprecedented situation. Now, the next director, who is criminally investigating one of the two candidates for president, may find him or herself bound by my precedent. Okay, so if that happens in the next 100 years, they'll have to deal with what I did. So I decided it was worth doing.
Mr. Cummings.
Director, I have just one question. You know, I've been sitting here listening to this, and I really, this is something that bothered me in the Lois Lerner case, and it bothers me in this case. And I'm just wondering your opinion. Ms. Lawrence talks about this, the chilling effect of your having to come here and justify your decisions. And I know that you've been really nice, and you just explained why you did what you did, and I'm glad you're doing it. But, you know, do you at all, and I mean, taking off, I'm just talking about, here you've got people making decisions and then being pulled here in the Congress to then say, okay, to be questioned about the decisions. At what point, or do you even think about it becoming a chilling effect? Because most people, you know, when their decisions made, don't get this kind of opportunity, as you well know. There are no statements. You know, they either get indicted or they're not. So I know that you see this as a special case, and I wonder whether you agree with Ms. Lawrence that we may be just going down a slippery slope. That's all I want to ask.
And my honest answer is, I don't think so. When I talked to the chairman, I agreed to come because I think the American people care deeply about this. There's all kinds of folks watching this at home or being told, well, lots of other cases were prosecuted and she wasn't. I want them to know that's not true. And so I want to have this conversation, and I actually welcome the opportunity. Look, it's a pain. I've had to go to the bathroom for about an hour, but it is
don't
really
worry,
important.
we're halfway done.
Right,
So.
it is really important to do, because this is an unprecedented situation. Transparency is the absolute best thing for me and for democracy. And I realize, Mr. Chairman, my folks told me I screwed up one fact that I should fix. I was misremembering. In the Petraeus case, we didn't find the notebooks in the attic. We found it in his desk. So I want to make sure I was fair to him about that. But I really don't think so. I don't think it has a chilling effect. Again, if there's another presidential candidate being investigated by the FBI, maybe they'll be bound by this. Lord willing, it's not going to happen again. Certainly, I have 2,619 days left in this job. It won't happen on my term, but if it does, I won't be chilled.
Thank you, John. If we need a humanitarian break, just give me the cue. But
no, I feel like we're almost done, though.
We're on the right trajectory. Okay. Yes, but we do need to. We'd like to recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Comey, your statement on Tuesday indicated that Secretary Clinton and her colleagues sent and received emails marked classified on an unsecured private email server that may or may not have been hacked by a foreign power. Are you aware that teenage hackers hacked the personal email accounts of CIA Director John Brennan, the Director of U.S. National Intelligence James Clapper, and FBI Deputy Director Mark Giuliano?
I am intensely aware. They didn't hack in the way we normally think of it, but that they, by trickery, got access to their accounts.
The point I want to make is that these were commercially protected personal email accounts that contained no classified information. Yet Mrs. Clinton used her personal email, not a commercial account, on a server in her basement without even this basic protection and transmitted classified information through that account. If teenagers in England were able to hack the personal email accounts of the Director of the CIA, the Director of U.S. National Intelligence, and the Deputy Director of FBI, does it concern you that sophisticated hackers or hackers working for foreign interests never attempted? I mean, does it seem reasonable that they never attempted or were never successful in hacking Mrs. Clinton's personal email accounts or one of her devices?
No, it concerns me a great deal, and that's why we spent so much time to see if we could see fingerprints of that.
Well, you said in your statement regarding your recommendation not to prosecute, to be clear, this does not suggest that in similar circumstances a person who engaged in this activity would face no consequences. To the contrary, these individuals are often subject to security or administrative sanctions, but that is not what we're deciding here. Do you stand by that?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, I thought you would. You also said you could not prove intent. What I want to touch on a couple things here. One, a reasonable person would not have compromised classified information by keeping that information on inadequately secure private devices. In other words, such a person would be viewed as unreasonable and unsuitable for any position in our government that included any responsibility for handling and protecting classified information. Would you agree?
I would agree it would be negligent. I can't prejudge a suitability determination, but it would definitely be stared at very hard.
Well, let me tell you why I bring this up. I sat here next to Mr. Hurd, who served our country valiantly, put his life on the line. And I don't know if you could sense the passion and intensity of his questions, because he knows people whose lives are on the line right now. And in regard to his questions, if someone, a U.S. intelligence agent, had their mission compromised, or worse, had been killed or injured or captured because of the carelessness of someone responsible for protecting classified information, would intent matter at that point?
In deciding whether to prosecute the person, of course. But yeah, that's the answer. Of course it would. The matter would be deadly serious, but the legal standards would be the same.
Well, what we're dealing with in this hearing is not the lack of due diligence in handling routine government data or information, but the lack of due diligence by Secretary Clinton and her carelessness in handling classified information that could have compromised American national security and, as Mr. Hurd pointed out, the missions and personal safety of our intelligence agents. That troubles me greatly. And I think the issue here, and I do respect you. I have spoken in your defense many times, at this point to my detriment. But I do believe that your answers are honest and factual. But based on your answers regarding Mrs. Clinton's use of email, and based on what we know, it seems to me that she is stunningly incompetent in her understanding of the basic technology of email and stunningly incompetent in handling classified information. I mean, you should never associate the Secretary of State and classified information with the word careless. It doesn't matter. I mean, we have to exercise the utmost due diligence. All of us in this committee do in handling this. You do in prosecuting cases. And I see that in what you're trying to do. I just think we need to leave here with this understanding that there's more to this story than we know. If a foreign hacker got into this, I can assure you that they know what was in those emails that were deleted. They read them all. They know what is in the emails that we never received. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. We'll now go to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thanks for coming on over to the Rayburn Building. As I understand it, your testimony today is that you have not brought criminal charges against Hillary Clinton, in part because you feel you can't prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and in part because she didn't understand the laws with regard to emails and servers and that sort of thing. Question for you. When she erased these emails, or no, digress for a second. You, however, did say that if somebody did this under you, there would be consequences. If somebody did exactly what Mrs. Clinton did, but was one of your lieutenants, or you think one of the lieutenants under the CIA or some other agency that deals with top secret documents, what would you do to those underlings?
I would make sure that they were adjudicated through a security disciplinary proceeding to figure out what are all the circumstances and then what punishment discipline is appropriate. That could range from being terminated to being reprimanded, and then a whole spectrum in between: suspension, loss of clearance. It's a bunch of different options.
Okay, but somehow, let's say one of your top 2 or 3 lieutenants, you find out that they've had this separate server out there and they're keeping secret documents, you know, flipping them around. Do you think they should be fired? Not criminally charged, but fired?
Yeah, I don't think it's appropriate to say. I think it should go through. We have a very robust process. There ought to be a very intense suitability review of that person. Maybe there's something we're missing that would mitigate the punishment we would impose, but it would have to go through our system.
Okay, next question, just for the listening audience here. At first, when I hear about erasing emails, I think it's, you know, like on my own phone where I might erase an auto insurance solicitation. The erasures here, however, were not just Mrs. Clinton pressing delete, there was a much greater effort made to make sure that these emails would never be recovered. Do you want to comment on what was done to erase the emails?
I think what you're referring to is after her lawyers say, although I'm not able to verify this, there were 60,000 or so left at the end of 2014. They went through them in a way I described in my statement 2 days ago, and then they produced the ones that were work-related, and then they erased from their system the ones that were not work-related. That was done using technical tools, basically, to remove them from the lawyers, from the servers, to wipe them away.
Okay, so in other words, the effort was not just Mrs. Clinton or somebody went delete, delete, delete. They went above and beyond that so that your top technical experts could not get back at these emails, correct?
Right, not fully. We were able to, by going...
You recovered a few.
Yeah, we could go through the lawyers' laptops and see some traces, but not fully recover them.
Okay, now, the information that I have, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, implies that these erasures were done in December of 2014, after the Benghazi scandal broke, after there were questions about the Clinton Foundation. Did you ever come across why she allowed these emails to sit out there, even for years after she stopped being Secretary of State, but all of a sudden, as these other scandals began to bubble up, she felt, or her lawyers felt, that she had to erase them?
Yeah, I think the way the process worked is she had emails that were just on her system. She actually had deleted some, I think, over time, as an ordinary user would. And then the State Department contacted her and other former secretaries and said, we have a gap in our records. We need you to look and see if you have emails and give them back. She then tasked her lawyers to engage in this review process of that 60-some thousand and make that cut, and then was asked by her lawyers at the end do you want us to keep the personal emails? She said, I have no use for them anymore. It's then that they issued the direction that the technical people delete them.
Do you think Mrs. Clinton knew that the technical people were erasing these emails so that even your top technical experts could recover them?
Based on my sense now of her technical sophistication, I don't think so.
You don't think the lawyers told her that that's what they were doing, erasing all these emails that everybody on this committee wanted to look at?
Yeah, and I'm sure we've asked this.
The type of lawyer wouldn't tell their client they were doing that, but
I don't think they. I think our evidence from our investigations, they did not. That they asked her, "Do you want to keep them?" And they said no, and they said wipe them away.
okay. Now, as I understand it, the goal was just to erase personal emails, but you've recovered emails that wouldn't be considered personal emails at all.
Correct.
Okay. I don't know that you didn't recover them, but based upon the emails that you recovered, presumably her lawyers or somebody was going well beyond personal emails. Is it possible we'll never be able to recover emails that dealt with the Clinton Foundation or dealt with the Benghazi scandal? Is it possible because of what her lawyers did that they were erasing things that were incriminating, maybe involving items that you yourself were not particularly investigating, but that these have now been destroyed forever?
Yes, it's possible. As I said in my statement on Tuesday, we did not find evidence to indicate that they did the erasure to conceal things of any sort. But it's possible, as I said on Tuesday, that there are work-related emails that were in the batch that were deleted.
I'm sorry, when you go to this length to make sure you can never recover the emails who are erased, wouldn't you think the intent is to make sure nobody ever looks at them again? Why otherwise would you just go delete?
Thank the gentleman. We'll give the director time to, if he wants to respond.
Sure. I guess it's a bit circular. You delete because you want to delete. But what I mean is we didn't find any evidence of evil intent, an intent to obstruct justice there.
You wouldn't have been able to.
I think
because you don't know it was deleted, but.
Okay. Thank the gentleman. Well, now recognize Mr. Russell of Oklahoma for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Comey, thank you for your long service and your long suffering. I think we're toward the end of the line here. I want to state for the record, with regard to national security, I sleep a little easier at night knowing that you're at the helm of the FBI. And thank you for your dedicated service and your integrity. You have stated in your statement and also multiple times here that there should be consequences for the mishandling of state secrets. If I held a top secret SCI in the Bureau, and I did hold one when I was in the United States Army in a career of service, I handle classified information here, but if I held that in the FBI and you discovered that I mishandled state secrets on a private server in my basement, would I be trusted by the Bureau to further handle top secret SCI information?
Maybe not. You would go immediately through a security process to review whether you should continue working for us, and if you do, what clearances you should retain.
If I violated the handling of state secrets in the FBI, would you consider me the best suitable candidate for promotion and higher responsibility?
It would be a serious concern, and we would stare at it very hard in a suitability review.
Although you have recommended to the Department of Justice that no criminal charges be brought to bear, are you recommending to the Department of Justice that there be no consequences for the mishandling of state secrets?
No, my recommendation was solely with respect to criminal charges.
What would you recommend?
I don't think it's for me to recommend.
But you do. You've been very open and even stated why you felt that these were unique sets of circumstances that called for greater transparency. You do make recommendations routinely, as you've stated here today. We're talking top secret SCI information that's been mishandled. You would take a dim view to that if I were an agent. What consequences? This is what the American people feel exasperated about. There seems to be no consequence. So in a case like this, if it's not going to be criminal charges recommended, what are the American people to do to hold their officials accountable if maybe they shouldn't be trusted for further promotion and higher responsibility.
And what I meant earlier is that's not a question that the American people should put to the FBI director. I can answer about the things within my remit, but that I understand the question, but it's not one for me to answer in my role.
Well, I hope it's one that the American people answer in the future, because we do have a choice about those that would mishandle information. And while we're all fallible human beings and we all make mistakes, in a case like this, I mean, for decades of my service in the Army Infantry and handling top secret SCI information, and then as a member of Congress, I mean, we know those responsibilities. Is it your view and others that have interviewed Mrs. Clinton that she would not have known what those responsibilities were?
No, I think in a way you would expect she understood the importance of protecting classified information.
Well, I would agree with that.